Hello, welcome back to 40 Days with the Fathers. We're on day 13, the second part of Justin Martyr's first apology, looking at chapters 12 to 23 of his text. So let's go straight into it. From here on, each chapter or so in this apology deals with a different area of Christian doctrine, with succinct arguments for the reality of what is believed and accepted. Because this text is so large, I'm going to try and summarise as much as I can and pull out any of the main points which stand out most for each argument. So if you don't get to read the whole text yourself, hopefully these sort of summaries will be enough to give you a flavour for what Justin was writing about and all the various aspects of Christian belief and doctrine in the 2nd century. Living righteously. Chapter 12 kicks off straight into a long dialogue about the righteousness of Christians and how they are the emperor's helpers and allies in promoting peace, due to their very nature and lifestyle in following Christ. Everyone is under God's watchful eye, Justin argues. No one can escape the notice of God. Because of this, each man goes to everlasting punishment or salvation according to the value of his actions. And the point he's trying to make is that if everyone understood this, they should be more inclined to live a virtuous life before God. And that is what the Christians preach. They're not wrongdoers, but rather are trying to counter that behaviour. If the emperor honestly valued the truth and wanted to uphold his reputation for piety and philosophy, he would act reasonably. Unless, of course, he, like the foolish, prefer custom to truth. Justin didn't mince his words, even when he was speaking to the emperor. He was quite happy to call him out if he thought there was logical inconsistencies with the emperor's actions and words and deeds. So, a rational faith. Continuing with the argument for acting rationally towards Christians, Justin outlines how the faith in which they profess is in actuality a rational faith. Before giving an explanation for this, he outlines the history of Christ, that he was born for a purpose and was crucified under Pontius Pilate, and how they learned that he was the Son of God to be worshipped. And to quote that a little bit, "We reasonably worship him, having learned that he is the Son of the true God himself, and holding him in second place, and the prophetic spirit in the third, we will prove. For they proclaim our madness to consist in this, that we give a crucified man a place second to the unchangeable and eternal God, the creator of all." And a small little footnote here is this small section, you probably noticed, it speaks of the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit, and quite possibly one of the earliest references to the Trinity that we have so explicitly in the early church. Just going against all those other silliness that floats around sometimes, that the Trinity was an invented idea by Constantine in the 4th century, whereas this is 165-ish, and Trinity is quite plainly there. Demonic influences. This is the start of misunderstanding, and Justin goes on to explain how it is the demons he previously mentioned in the previous chapters that go about misrepresenting the Christian faith. But in reality, Christians are changed people. The evil and wicked things they once did and loved, they now do the opposite of. As he says, "We who formerly delighted in fornication, but now embrace chastity alone, we who valued above all the things the acquisition of wealth and possessions, now bring what we have into a common stock," which is obviously a reminiscent thought back to Acts chapter 2, verses 44 to 45, where it says they held all things in common, they shared all their belongings amongst themselves. It appears that continued for well into a couple hundred years after the apostles. But in case it would seem that he is reasoning sophistically, Justin wants to present quotes from Christ's teaching to prove that he was no sophist, but his words was the power of God. And for clarity, since words have changed meaning over time and fallen into disuse, being a sophist and speaking sophistically was a form of teaching in Greek philosophy. So not talking posh, as we might think when we say, oh, you're speaking sophistically. So sophisticated. It was a technical term for Greek philosophy. It was a way of reasoning with clever but false or fallacious arguments that just sounded good. Whether or not they were accurate or moral was beside the point. So if you were a sophist, you could reason well, get your point across, but didn't necessarily hold to truth, as long as your argument was influential and got people to change their minds. It didn't matter whether it was moral or ethically right, what you were saying, which was sort of the negative side of Greek philosophy. And so just in saying that Jesus wasn't a sophist, he wasn't someone who just came around and spoke fancy things, clever arguments that didn't actually line up with the truth. The teachings of Jesus. Justin lists out a whole page full of quotes from Jesus, all of which we'd recognise from the Gospels. From his teachings on looking at women with lust, to divorce, to praying for your enemies, to not worrying about life. It's a nice summary of Jesus' moral teachings on the way in which we should strive to live, which Justin then follows on from with more of Jesus' teachings on responding to violence and swearing oaths, saying, Jesus has exalted us all then to lead. Jesus has exalted us to lead all men by practice and gentleness, from shame and the love of evil, by which it is proved, because many men who were like the emperor have changed their violent and tyrannical disposition because of the examples of Christians. After all of this, Justin then seeks to clarify the difference between those who are Christians in name only to those who are really followers of Jesus by quoting Matthew 7, verses 21 to 23. The bit where it says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, and saying, let those who are not found living as he taught be understood to be no Christians. And in an unexpected turn, he rounds off this section by essentially giving the emperor permission, or rather demanding it of the emperor, to punish those who are not living pursuant to his teachings and are Christians in name only. So he makes the point saying, if you don't live like Jesus taught, then you are a Christian in name only. You're not actually a Christian. And I know some people will say that still now. Some people find that probably a bit offensive, but it's kind of the truth of it. There's no point following Jesus or a religion, following anything, if you're not actually following it. You just say you're that thing. I suppose it's like that silly little saying people say, like, standing in a garage doesn't make you a car any more than sitting in a church makes you a Christian. It's what you do with your life, how you live it out, how you follow the teachings of it. So just in saying to the emperor, if you're going to punish anyone, punish those who are lying, basically. Just using the name Christian for their own ends or laziness. Civil obedience. Quoting more from Jesus, Justin makes the point that everywhere, we, more readily than all men, endeavour to pay to those appointed by you the taxes both ordinary and extraordinary, as we've been taught by Jesus. Quoting from Matthew 22, verses 19 to 21, which, that bit that says, give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, to back up his point. He goes on to say that as well, Jesus taught them to pray for their rulers, which they do, but if those rulers pay no regards to our prayers and frank explanations, then it is no loss to the Christians, since they are convinced that the wicked will suffer eternal consequences. The resurrection. This one's interesting, because just in contrast, the spiritual powers that the emperor will be familiar with from his, which he'll be familiar with from his own divinations, oracles and magi, and dream centers and assistant spirits or familiars, to prove the point that even after death, souls are in a state of sensation, and thus there is an afterlife worth considering. So the emperor, kind of like what you probably remember from times in the Old Testament, kings and that, who had their own magi, or what do you call them? I've forgotten the word now. But people, their own sort of prophets, I guess, that were there to divine things, oracles, tell them what they want to hear sometimes. Kind of like what Daniel was doing. He was part of those sort of wise men that was around the king. So the emperor would consult with these people. He would be familiar with the familiar spirits that would come with them and tell them things. So he's just as using the emperor's own experience with the supernatural to say, look, you know this is there, you've seen it, you actively take part in it, so you know there's an afterlife. You know that something survives after death, after this life. So let that be the warning to you that what he's saying is true. That there is more to this than just this life, and he should know it. And he goes on to say that because these practitioners of divinations, etc., are granted favours, that the Christians should also be granted the same, because they more firmly believe in God, since we expect to receive again our own bodies via the resurrection. So the resurrection is something which seems to be a sticking point to accept, but they maintain that with God nothing is impossible. And he goes on to contrast the way in which they will be planted like seeds in the ground through death, so that in the future they will come up with new bodies. To try and explain this concept even more, the resurrection is contrasted with human seed, i.e. sperm. And kind of as weird sounding as this sort of example is he gives, it works. So to quote Justin on this bit, he's speaking to the emperor, if I were to show you human seed and a picture of a man, and were to say with confidence that from such a substance, such a being could be produced, would you believe before you saw the actual production? So basically, if you'd never known human growth, and you weren't a human, and someone showed you a drop of fluid and a photo of an adult and said that one produced the other, would you believe it if you hadn't already witnessed it to be true? In the same way then, the resurrection happens, and it can only be accepted by those who are willing to believe something which seems impossible, which will, in God's appointed time, rise again and put on incorruption. I mean, it might seem a bit gross to us sometimes today, but, you know, he makes a valid point. If you just saw some goop and a photo of a human and said, that makes that, you'd be like, what? If you weren't a human, I guess. So in the same way, our bodies go in the ground, we know they die, they rot, they disappear, but somehow that is like a seed that's planted that will grow again into a new and incorruptible body. Elements of truth in Greek philosophy and poetry. Justin lists out a few known poets and philosophers of which the emperor would be familiar with, saying that even these people teach certain aspects which are similar to Christian doctrine, such as the world was created and arranged by God, as Plato taught, that the souls of the departed are conscious and the wicked ones punished, with the righteous rewarded, which is similar to what the poets and philosophers, etc. taught. So now he asks that if on some points we teach the same things as poets and philosophers, whom you honour, and in some cases go beyond what they say to greater things, why are we unjustly hated more than all the others? That's a fair point. Further to this argument, Justin then contrasts the history and life of Christ with the Roman gods, such as Jupiter and Mercury, to say that in those accounts the Romans accept such wonders like virgin births and miraculous healings. So why then should it be so hard to accept that Jesus, though born a man, was in fact the begotten Son of God, the Word, Logos, made flesh. Justin then closes off his argument to prove that Jesus is superior to these other gods because what has been taught us by Christ and by the prophets who preceded him are alone true and are older than all the writers who have ever existed, which was proven by the Word becoming a man to teach these things for the conversion and restoration of the human race. He again mentions about the demonic influences which have had their way through the Greek poets to slander the Christians' name and doctrines, to which he will defend next in the following chapters and what we shall read about in tomorrow's reading. It becomes more and more obvious that there is a spiritual battle going on behind the scenes of life, especially considering these arguments we've just read. Otherwise, if the Greeks were teaching a faith so similar to Christianity in some regards, why would they hate and persecute the Christians so much? The words of Jesus in Luke 21 verse 17 about being hated due to his name echo very deeply in these chapters, that's for sure. It's a bit longer than the other ones, but Justin packs a lot into his text, and this is just skimming the iceberg, really. Tip of the iceberg. But yeah, I hope you liked it, found something interesting in that. Maybe what makes you want to read it yourself. Tomorrow, next reading, we'll be carrying on with Justin. And like, subscribe, buy the book. See the links below to support me on Patreon. And I shall see you tomorrow. Bye.